Hey folks, this is Nick. I'm here with Randy Cummings. We're back to you with another week while he's here with us. And this week, I want to talk about things that you historically have seen over your 11 years in the industry, just that farmers struggle with or could do better. This isn't indoor farming. This isn't market gardening. This is just all-encompassing, all the farmers. Let's broad stroke, just some things that you think can be improved on, or really should be thought about, not necessarily for new farmers, but just for farmers or even some people that may run into, I don't want to say bad habits, but comfortable habits.
Sure.
How about that?
Sure.
Figure that one out quick. And this one certainly is going to skew for a new farmer, and I believe it all gets better, but I think germination of seeds is really more complicated than what people think, and at the same time I think they make it overly complicated.
Sure.
So there's a couple of different ways to look at that.
It's a conversation I'm used to having, every single day. I think a lot of it starts with looking at a quality seed source. So I'll give you an example, right? You can buy seeds from a national known company. You can buy seeds from you can probably walk into your grocery store and buy a packet of seeds off a rack, right? And I'm sure there's a price difference, but there's also a huge quality difference. And by that I mean those seeds on that rack have been sitting there, could be a year,
could have been sitting in a hot warehouse.
That's exactly it. There's no quality control. There's no updated germination test.
There's no germination test.
Right.
Right.
So, a company that's selling more bulk seed, quarter pounds, 5 pounds, 100 pounds, their quality testing standards are above and beyond those that's just packet-based only company. They have to, by law, test their seeds every 6 months. Where a packet company may have to test it once a year. The germ's a little low. We're going to throw a couple more seeds in that packet and call it a day. And then again, sits on a hot warehouse out back somewhere. And there is just that. There's no semblance of quality. There could be off types, the whole shebang. So I think that's really the step one is buying seed from a reputable national known seed company that has customer service, has someone you can call and talk to, has detailed information on the back about how to plant it, and the temperature. And I think that's probably a great place to move into is germ temperature for seeds. So I don't know how many times I've fielded a question about, hey, I bought 10 products, and 5 of them didn't germinate. It would be extremely odd that 5 different products all would not perform, right? There's got to be a common denominator there. So if one didn't, we could talk about that. But it could be that they want to be on a heat mat with a certain soil temp and you're not using one. Could be that they don't want to be on a heat mat and you are using one. So perfect example, right? Like tomatoes might want to be somewhere between, I don't know off the top of my head, 70 to 85 degrees maybe soil temp to germinate. They could take 2 weeks, take 2.5 weeks. Spinach, once that soil temp starts getting over 70 degrees, that seed's going to want to go dormant, right? It doesn't thrive in hot conditions, and therefore the seed is, for lack of a better term, programmed to say, if I can't survive as an adult in these conditions, my best protection is to not germinate in the first place. So reading the back of the seed packet, going on the company's webpage that you purchased it from, looking at, there's some great seed catalogs out there that really break it down. And whether you choose to buy from that seed company or not, hanging onto that catalog as almost like a mini encyclopedia with those growing instructions in it can be extremely valuable. So
and the top folks doing seeds, there's if you really dig into each individual listing, it's going to break down what type of soil does it like. Do you need to do scarification? Do you need to do pre-soaking? Do you need to put it on the heat mat? And if it is on the heat mat, dial in the temperature range.
Exactly.
That it's really difficult to do cool season crops with warm season crops at the same time. We've got a video on that. We'll link that down below if I remember. But but it's you saw that chart as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that tells the story, breaks that down. I could talk for 20 minutes about it, and that chart can kind of quickly summarize that. So I think that's a fantastic tool. But more often than not, Nick, what I tend to see is it tends to be too warm, right? So someone buys seed in February, they may be succession planting. They might plant every couple weeks. They start stuff in their high tunnel or their greenhouse, and they're telling me, hey, on my fourth planting, the seed's not germinating. It must have died. Well, let's talk about what's changed between where you planted these in February and now it's June, right? So, as well as I that it's probably 10 degrees warmer in a high tunnel than it is outdoors, right? So now we're in June. Depending on where you are, it might be 70 degrees outside, could be 90 degrees outside. Now that high tunnel is 80 degrees or 100 degrees, and I'm not surprised at all to hear that your lettuce isn't germinating or your spinach isn't germinating. It doesn't have a chance to. So let's talk about shade cloth. Let's talk about maybe try germinating them in your walk-in cooler or an air-conditioned room, or are your trays too close to the heater in your high tunnel, or are they too close to the roll-up side and it's too cold for those? So a lot of times a picture will tell 1,000 words, and if you take a picture and you bounce it to your sales rep, and I think that's something to talk about too, is when you're buying a product and have it be so incredibly important to the success of your farm, you should know who you're dealing with. You should know your seed vendor sales rep. You should know your bootstrap sales rep, and be comfortable asking questions if you get in a bind. The struggles you're going to have, that person has already dealt with hundreds of times and can walk you right through it.
Well, and again, that's how we met, as I was wearing you out when I started my farm, calling you, and that came down to, look, man, you're the territorial rep at the time for Texas. This is my growing conditions. What are people ordering in this area?
Sure.
Or this region or similar regions that is working and not, and you've pointed me to several different lettuce. I was indoor, I was outdoor, and there was much different conversations between that. There was some tomato specialty stuff. You got me in front of Andrew Medford, and we talked about tomatoes for a minute or two.
Yeah.
So Andrew can drone on about tomatoes for a long time, but that one conversation I had with him completely turned around my tomato yield, production, the quality, and it wasn't a tweak of the variety. It was a tweak of how we were watering and the times of day that we were doing certain things. Having somebody to talk to as far as a representative, it shortened the time it would have took me to figure out by months, if not seasons.
Sure. And the difference is, like I said, we've had those conversations before. And I'll give you a perfect example. Like I'm not a tomato expert, but I can point you to someone that is, right? If you're building a hoop house in Texas, and you're trying to figure out, do you need roll-up sides? Do you need insect netting? How are we going to vent this thing? That's something where we can tag in Julian. He's definitely been around the block. I'm going to lean on his expertise. we start talking about building a high tunnel in northern latitudes, and I know we can also worry about getting humidity buildup. Like, we're not going to roll those sides up every day when it's 30 degrees in there, but we might need to talk about cracking a vent. We might need to talk about floating row cover, get a little warmer, putting those to bed every night and uncovering during the day. So we've got subject matter experts that can help. And we can also point you to other subject matter experts. So you need a little bit of help with payment for that high tunnel. Let's talk about NRCS grants. We're familiar with that process, but if we're not, we can point you to someone that is. We can guess at what kind of...
And somebody that is keeping up on what's currently going on with that program, because it changes all the time.
Exactly. And plant diseases change all the time. I mean, we look at basal downy mildew, for an example. That wasn't a problem 10 years ago. And it's been a huge problem the last 8 years. And it seems like every time there's a variety that comes on the market with disease resistance, that those strains quickly evolve faster than the genetics can keep up. Let's point you to Cornell, who's the leading expert on basal downy mildew research. Let's point you to where you can take a tissue sample of your plant and send it to your local extension service or your local university that's got a plant pathology program, and have them tell you exactly what's going on with that. Because I can look at a picture and say, it looks like it needs more calcium, or this looks like, such and such spotted wilt virus, but we can guess and we can throw things at it, or you can blame the plant, or you can send it to an expert and have them say, here's the problem, and here's our recommendation.
Well, and listen to the experts you just said. Your extension office that has a pathologist on staff, a university that has done blind scientific-based studies, or you could go to Facebook and ask somebody that also started 6 months ago.
Sure. It's nice to have that sense of community, but all our systems and farms and disease pressure are vastly different. So maybe that person's been farming 6 months more than you. Maybe they've been 20 years. But
if they're in a different state, yeah. I mean, it could be vastly different.
Sure. And even same state, so are they rolling up the sides on their high tunnel? Are they spraying for something? Are they using a different variety than you? Are they selling to their local grocery store these rock hard tomatoes that are shippable and have shelf life, but no chef or restaurant or farmer's market customer is going to want that? So
what's their water source?
So, they water overnight. We talked to Andrew Mefford, and he's like, no way, man. Like, that's the last thing you want to do on a tomato, right? So, going to the source of truth, going to the people that eat, breathe, and sleep this type of work is really your best bet. And don't be afraid to ask what those resources are. Like I said, we talk to growers every single day. And not only do we talk to them and find out their problems, but we also ask their advice and we consult. It's a two-way consultation. Like I said, for everything we teach someone, we learn from someone as well. And when we hear 10 people are doing it the same way and they're crushing it, that's the type of advice we want to pass off, and not some random person.
And I'm also going to say that if somebody were to call in to us or any other company or any other rep, it's still the farmer's responsibility to do the work based off the advice given. So we can sit here and say it could be X, Y, or Z. Here's some places to go figure that out. Don't take our word for it. I mean, don't take anybody's word for it. Go and find out, the best for you. And that may be trying 2 to 3 of those options.
Sure. And one of the conversations I like to have, right, is that you can grow anything, anywhere, if you try hard enough and you
spend enough money,
right? But there are some times where the right answer is let's not grow this, or let's not try to shove a square peg into a round hole. Um,
Even if it's their passion.
even if it's their passion, I think the bigger question is, do you have a market for it?
Right.
And can you be efficient and productive with that? I like to talk about sustainability in agriculture, and I think that's a two-way street, right? We want to sustain the environment. We want to be good custodians of the planet, right? But sustainability has to be sustainability in business too. If your farm goes out of business in 2 seasons, then it's also not sustainable. You have to be there and keep that going to really be able to have that long term benefit on your community, the food industry, and the environment that you want to do, right?
You also, as we were outlining this, brought up trials and how important trialing can be. Here recently, I've had a rash of phone calls where people have analysis paralysis and they won't start. They don't find it necessary to, I guess, budget in not only the time, but the expense it costs to, this is my room, this is my warehouse, this is my hoop house, these are the seeds I'm thinking about, this is the soil I plan on using, let's do a couple of runs.
Sure.
I made this investment in this very specific example. Somebody bought one of our grow racks, $2,200 investment, roundabout. They had to get their money back right away. They painted themselves into a room that they couldn't get out of. They were afraid to start. I was like, you just got to start. I mean, you have to get out there and do it. And don't expect the first one to be sellable.
Sure.
Don't expect the first 10 to be sellable. Work with whoever your buyer is and find what they're looking for. But you have to start. You have to try out a couple of different things.
And we can say that because we live that every day. The high tunnel kits that we're selling today are not the prototype one for one, right? You set it up, you pick it apart, you learn from your mistakes, you ask questions, you try different configurations, and then you find something that works. And growing is no different. And sometimes that happens at the beginning of the process. Sometimes it happens in your fifth, sixth season. And the phenomenon that we always see is, I'll kind of share this example, right? So my grandmother, before she passed, loved gardening, and for the last ever, she's always planted, straight 8 cucumbers. It's an heirloom variety, good for pickling, whatever. And man, every year I would see her pull cucumbers out that were curled and horseshoe shaped and tiny or whatever. But she may have had one good season, and that's the memory she's going off from, is that, oh, that was so good. And we always remember varieties in a fond way of, we had one great season, or customers raved about the flavor, how good it was. And some of that stuff diminishes over time. It changes with the seasons, it changes with climate. Sometimes the genetics can just start to drift. So, what a world of difference when you start putting, a cucumber in that garden that's got some disease resistance and some yield. And it kind of changes everything. And I think it's especially true with the pandemic and supply chain. Seeds they're not produced on an assembly line. You can't just turn a switch. These are things that are subject to Mother Nature. There are crop failures. And so if you have a pumpkin you pick operation and you've been growing the same pumpkin for 20 years, if you don't have a backup variety that's going to work for you, and that seed is suddenly either out of stock, had a bad seed production year, or has disease or whatever.
Could be allocated.
Absolutely. And that happens all the time. And we can I think a great topic would be seed production, and we can push that down the road
next on my list.
And that's a fun conversation to have, but it's always good to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. And we'll talk about spinach is a fantastic example of this, right? I don't know what the exact percentage is, but something like 90% of spinach production is in California, and they have incredible mildew pressure due to humidity and just their environment. So the entire spinach seed industry caters to that market, and what California needs in a spinach variety might be vastly different than what you need in Texas, what I need in Maine,
which is also a big producer.
But we're a fraction of the market.
Right.
So what we find is you might find a variety that is perfect for Texas, and that seed company phases it out because it no longer works in California. So dedicating a little bit of trial space, a little bit of budget to looking at alternatives, looking at A, B, or C, looking at, hey, my market really loves straight 8 cucumbers, but let's look at Diva or Socrates or Bristol or whatever on the off chance that something happens, or you stumble across the next thing that just cranks out your production.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember, everything's a blur these days, but I think I remember doing Napoli carrots.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden Napoli was gone, and then they came back. I mean, my best producing carrot now all of a sudden I couldn't get. I think I switched over to Mokum or something like that.
Yep.
We're going to get into seed production next,
Sure.
so I guess this is the perfect transition.
Sure.
So how in the hell are seeds being delivered to us, and where do they come from?
There may be a slight difference between open pollinated seeds and heirloom seeds, but a national size seed company may contract a seed production with a grower. So, Nick, you've been growing seeds for 20 years. You approach a seed company and say, hey, I'd like to produce seed for you. And I think the first question becomes is, Nick, what are you familiar with growing? If you've never grown watermelon before, we certainly aren't going to put watermelon on your plate to produce seed for us right? But you might say, hey, I've got a lot of history growing carrot seed. Perfect. So we have you produce carrot seed for us. We'll pay you by the acre. We pencil out that this variety, accompanied with your growing methods, should produce 1 ton of carrot seed.
That's a lot of carrot
seeds.
It's
a lot of carrots. And again, we're using kind of made up figures here, but typically the way it works is you may have a great year, and that acre of land produces 3,000 pounds. We've contracted with you. We only want 2,000, but we might have that first right to refusal to buy that extra 1,000 pounds for you. Or we might say that we're at $10 a pound, and any overages we have to buy from you, but we're going to buy any overages at $5 a pound. So you try to find something that's mutual for both parties, but that's generally how that's done. And we usually contract a year, 2 years in advance. We're forecasting based on what we think our needs are, and that could be a whole separate conversation. But then again, we're still at that mercy of Mother Nature. We expect 2,000 pounds. You get insect pressure, carrot rust fly or something, and hey, we expected carrot seed at 85% germ and 2,000 pounds of it, but what you were actually able to produce might only be 1,000 pounds, and at the end of the day, it might only be 70% germ, and that may be an issue.
Does that then fall on the farmer that, hey, you did not fulfill your contract?
It may depend on how the contract's worded or how that's set up, and I've never been that entrenched in that process. There may be some language in there. Again, no one's trying to hurt the other guy. You're
Right.
trying to find something that is mutual beneficial for everybody, but typically you're getting paid by the pound at X rate if it meets, this condition, that condition, and that condition. But I think a lot of growers that aspire to be seed producers um, don't realize that the burden is on them to have seed cleaning equipment. So that might be, a density table that sorts seed by its weight, which might filter out any bad seed. It might filter out,
Debris and
exactly. It might be color graded. It might be able to filter out like your hogweed and bindweed and whatever weed seed that might accidentally get harvested when you're harvesting carrot seed. They're expecting you to maybe walk out and rogue the field and look for off types. So this is what this variety is supposed to look like. During this production, if this flower is a slightly different color, or this plant is a foot taller, or the yield looks off, we don't want to save seed from that plant. And that's where a lot of seed companies go wrong, is they don't pay enough attention to culling out those.
and just like anything else, I mean, I would imagine that some farmers are really great at it. Some, this is their full-time gig. The equipment, the seed sorting, the washing, well, not washing, but the cleaning of it.
Sure.
How it's delivered, whether that's by the 2,000-pound tote or different bags or different containers.
Is it in storage? Is it the proper humidity? Was it in a cooler? And then you pull it out of the cooler, put it right on a hot, humid truck, and now there's mold growing because you didn't kind of give that condensation and moisture a chance to kind of evaporate out of there before you put it on a hot truck going halfway across the country or whatever. But seed production is a delicate process, and
a lot of stuff seems like it'd have to go right.
It inherently is set up to fail, right? So it has to go right, but this goes back to the conversation that we first kind of kicked off, I think, in the last podcast, Nick, which was this one, which is, know your seed source, work with a reputable company, because a national well-known company with true customer service and quality, that 1,000 pounds of 70% carrot germ, they're gonna pass that up, and then that seed producer is gonna sell it to this other mom and pop rickety fly-by-night shop, and that's what's going on that rack.
Or it could also be like, I can order wheat seeds from any of the major market garden seed companies,
sure.
Or I could go buy 50 pounds at the feed store.
Yep.
But when I open it up, that 50 pounds is going to have straw debris in it. It's going to be dustier.
Exactly.
It's going to be for a more commodity type farm.
And the secret the secret people don't talk about is, there's this inherent thought of, if I buy my seed, quote unquote, locally, that it's gonna match my growing conditions, it's gonna work for me, and it's gonna be good quality, and I'm gonna be successful with it. And that's not always true. That seed could all be grown in Colorado, where there's low humidity and low chance for plant disease. It could be coming from the one big seed producer that does that, or it could be from mom and pop seed producer that doesn't meet the quality standard of some of these national companies. And that's the trap that a lot of people fall in, and they don't even realize that there's better quality out there somewhere else.
Well, and the mom and pops, I'm glad they're there, but they also don't have the resources to back up warranties or to back up the customer service side, where it's like, look, this lot didn't germinate.
Sure.
Let me send you a different lot that we haven't had any troubles with. It's on the house. you're covered.
And or maybe they even do. Let's pretend that let's pretend that the service warranty and this seed is coming from an hour away from you, and they appreciate you, and they're going to replace the seed. That's all well and good, but if you miss your planting deadline, it doesn't do a lick of good for you, right? So let's get it right the first time.
Or if you don't look internally, what am I the one that actually messed up this germination?
Sure.
And we go and do the exact same thing.
That's so important to think about in the quality control process, right? So you've got a grower that's struggling, and their income, their farm, their livelihood depends on their success. No one is trying to dispute or skirt around a customer service issue, right? Like, oh, I didn't get the right product in the box, or this product didn't work for me, or these seeds didn't germinate. If a company's asking you probing questions, was it the right temperature? Can you send me a picture? Help me understand what's going on. It's not because they don't want to honor your claim or push you away. It's that they don't want you to fail again, right? Like, you can't afford to fail again. So,
and sometimes we do have to report to somebody else.
Sure.
So I have only seen one instance where we had to probe our manufacturer that does our greenhouse film.
Yep.
Just once. And it was an isolated incident. There wasn't actually anything wrong with the plastic, it turns out. But we had to send it to them to take a look at, to make sure that we didn't miss anything. And they're the ones that's going to honor the warranty. It's
Sure.
their warranty. So we're obligated to do the investigation for them as well. That leads us into diversification on the farm, whether that's a diversified sales channel, a diversification of crops, a diversification of varieties, like you just mentioned. I see the inherent value of specializing, and you and I both know farmers that just do one thing,
Sure.
and they do it very, very well. This is in the context of a market gardener who is relying on tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, possibly some eggplants, a little bit of microgreens, lettuce, herbs, the top 8 kind
Sure.
of thing. Within that top 8, might be worthwhile to trial out a couple of different ones on the shoulders of the tunnel.
Sure.
An extra row of a different type of lettuce. Your customers may love that a hell of a lot more than they do anything else. But you don't know until you try.
Right. And I think the diversification is so key in the right operation. So I'll give you two sides of the spectrum, right? So one is, years ago, visiting, some of the farmers markets in Texas, right? And you look and you see this vendor at this booth has peppers, and this is middle of summer in Texas, right? So they've got peppers, they've got eggplant, and they've got okra. And then you go to this other booth and they've got peppers, eggplant, okra. The next booth, peppers, eggplant, okra. And then you go and you see the JBG Organics booth, and they've got onions, potatoes, squash, and their stuff wasn't sourced anywhere else. They're not pulling in, but they've got cold storage. They may have harvested carrots in the spring and stored them for several months, but their diverse offerings, their booth looks like a miniature grocery store. And so when you've got a random person walking through that farmer's market and they see 6 vendors with the same 3 products, there's really no way to stand out your farm from theirs. But if you can have that purple carrot or that purple cauliflower or something that's going to catch someone's eye and have them stop and talk to you, it was the purple carrot that got them to stop. And while they're there, they're going to buy your okra and peppers. And
No, I wasn't trying to stop you. I have like the perfect example of this. So a bit ago, told you we was doing Napoli carrots.
Yep.
Straight orange, typical carrot, right?
Yep.
At the same time, we did an equal amount of Cosmos, which is purple skin.
Yep.
Orange core. I could not give away the purple carrots.
Really? Yeah.
But the same thing happened. What are those? And they're right next to the other carrots. I'm like, what do you mean, what are these? But they've never seen a purple carrot.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say, we sold out of Napoli's every single week. I was eating purple carrots and they were coming out of my ears. But I then tweaked for the next season. We grew a little bit of purple carrots to stop them. And then we would still continue to blow out of Napoli's. And I was able to utilize the space to grow much more of the thing that was going to sell for my market.
Sure.
It took a season to do that. It took a second to do the tweak, but it took a full season to realize the lesson of that because we ordered one package instead of 4 ounces.
Sure. And so part of that is a concept I know you and I've talked about before, Nick, which is knowing your market, right? And so knowing your clientele may not be ready for purple carrots. Your chefs and some of the other outlets that you have might, right? But how do you get someone to stop at market and talk to you? What's that thing that's going to pull them in? Whether how you have it stacked, your brand, your packaging, your product, but at the same time, getting a sense of knowing your audience. Paris, Texas might not be ready for arugula or a spinach with a red mane or a purple carrot.
Or they call it spinach.
So we see that we see that too. So don't be afraid to try things. Know who your target customer is. Diversify yourself to reduce risk, right? So going back to the pandemic, and I'm very much looking forward to the days where we forget what that was, but moreover, microgreens, right? Restaurants closed for the pandemic. That business takes a lull. A lot of those farms took a beating and aren't here today because of it, because they weren't diversified. But now the growers that had field growing, they had a high tunnel. They're selling tomatoes. They're selling, carrots. They're selling lettuce. We saw the restaurant side take a beating the last 2 years, but CSAs are through the roof. Farmers markets were through the roof. I imagine a lot of hometowns, if they're anything like mine, I go to the grocery store and there's hardly anything on the shelf some weeks, because panic buying, because supply chain, whatever. Those farmers market growers and CSA growers cleaned up, right? So how do we find ways to diversify the business, diversify the offerings without overextending?
And I would think like a lot of that to me would be go ahead and build out that infrastructure, have it ready in case you need it. So for instance is, I know a lot of growers, they were all of a sudden having to switch from the restaurant sales, completely start from square one.
Yep.
With an ordering platform. They had to change their website. They had to do this. They had to do that. They had to then sign up to take credit cards because they're used to ACH billing from a restaurant. What if that, look, all this is hindsight, right?
Sure.
I don't know if I would have done
Sure.
it. But if you were the farmer that sold to restaurants, but at the same time had a full system that you could work on the off season.
Sure.
In the rare case that, hey, we might do this someday, let's have it ready and have it ready to go. If that type of farmer could instantly switch that on,
yep,
and even be a week ahead of everybody else, first to market is so valuable. Something to consider.
And
So it's not just a diversification of crop, but it's a diversification of the way you're able to service a customer in a vast pace.
those growers, those operations and growers that did that also did something, which is they got out of their own way. So they didn't say, well, this is how we've always done it. Right? And that's so dangerous.
We're blaming the chef.
Business. Mm.
I saw that. So how could they not buy from us? Because they can't open.
Right.
What are they going to do?
What's worse, you want them to buy and then not pay their invoice? Looking for opportunities to diversify, spread that risk out. And we're seeing it every day. We've seen a ton of vegetable farms diversify into flowers. We've seen vegetable growers diversify into hemp and cannabis, and there are risks there too, right? At some point that market might get saturated, and they may have to constantly reevaluate what they are, what their offerings are, what they're doing. But don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to look at other streams.
All this reminded me of a question I've always had and never had the wherewithal to ask it. But as microgreens came on, let's just say over the last 8 years, I mean, went from this was not a thing to now it's a big thing. How did that affect seed production? And I also want to secondarily ask, I see a lot of people question the extra expense for microgreen broccoli versus just broccoli. I'd like to break both of those down. So I could just see a broccoli farmer. Now all of a sudden the demand is through the roof because of microgreens. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. So to try to unpack that, I think the very first thing to understand and to frame the conversation is a lot of the varieties that are used for microgreens are selected for that purpose because they're inexpensive varieties that are cheap to produce in bulk. So,
and you're not growing it to the full head of broccoli.
Exactly. So when we look at full head broccoli, and that, I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know if that's a 90-day crop, 100-day crop, 130-day crop. It might be variety specific in slotting, but you've got a decent commitment there for that head. So it might need to be disease resistance. It might need to be slotted for a very specific season, climate, zone.
It takes up a lot of real estate.
It does, right? So, and it's so sensitive to weather changes. So a field broccoli grower should, in my opinion, really be using a hybridized variety that is slotted very specific to their season, their region, and what they're trying to achieve. That broccoli variety that is open pollinated and has been on the market for 40 years might work for that home gardener that if they have a bad season, it's not going to cripple their business. So there are those open pollinated heirloom types out there in some of these crops, and you'll see vast differences 100 days in on a 2.5 foot tall plant. But when they're only this stage, they're only an inch tall, 2 inches tall, they might have their first true leaves. All of that goes out the window. And now we're only looking at flavor. We're only looking at yield. We might be looking at color or leaf shape that is interesting visually, and we're looking at seed price. And so that broccoli variety that has a very specific slot, it has a very specific mother plant, father plant. It might have been cross-pollinated and back-crossed 6 generations deep and taken 10 years for a plant breeder to select those crosses. That might be $1 a seed variety in some cases, depending on the species and crop or whatever. But that heirloom broccoli, open pollinated, might be $15 a pound. So that right there is a big differentiator on what seeds get used for microgreens from a agronomic standpoint. But the
mind-bending thing about it is you're growing this variety for microgreens that's never going to come to a true head. But
Yep.
you have to grow the true head to get the seeds. It has to
Yes.
bolt out to get the seeds.
Yeah. And in some cases, the varieties that are very quick to bolt make the best are the best seed producers. They're the most reliable seed producers. So one of the reasons some of these bolt resistant varieties are so expensive is, one, because they're valuable to growers for that holding ability in the field. It gives them a longer harvest window. But what it's also driving that seed price is it's hard to produce seed for. So, that Napoli or Nelson carrot might be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if that sucker doesn't produce seed well, and in a lot of cases when a variety gets phased out, that's the reason. Great carrot, crappy seed producer. And it doesn't take many failed seed productions for a company to walk away from a seed variety. It's just too risky and too expensive. But now, going back to that open pollinated microgreen seed, it's the very similar conversation. Hey, we're going to pay a grower to grow out 2,000 pounds of this. And I don't think there's any sustainability issues, concerns there. There's a market, there's a consumer. We're giving that seed producer a job. It's job security. The forecasting and supply chain issues can also be tough. So it's one of the reasons some seed companies will put two different SKUs on a product. So I know if I'm going to sell this open pollinated broccoli to a field grower and they need an acre of it, I don't know, it might be a quarter pound of seed. So when we add a second grower and a third grower and a fourth grower to that product, now we're going from quarter of a pound to a pound of seed. Very incrementally small changes in forecast and supply needs. Now, if we say we got a microgreen grower and they need 5 pounds a month of broccoli seed, and now, we need 60 pounds a year for them, and here's another microgreen grower that needs 60 pounds, and another microgreen, suddenly taking on another grower, that demand and that forecasting changes rapidly.
I don't know. Was it the golden era? Was it the heyday when microgreens first started coming on? How did the seed industry as a whole buffer against this onslaught of demand? Like you just said, you used to have people that were ordering, an ounce,
sure,
a quarter pound at a time. All of a sudden, you got 20 people ordering 60 pounds a year. I mean, there had to have been at least some shortages initially.
I think yes and no. So there are a lot of open pollinated, inexpensive seed producers, seed companies out there. So sometimes it's easy to sub one from another. If someone's using Waltham 44 broccoli as a broccoli for microgreens and they're out of stock on that, they might have another supplier that can use DeChico. And that's the great thing about using heirlooms and open pollinated seed is there's a lot of different seed sources to draw from, in the US and internationally. There can be quality differences, but the other buffer, I guess, Nick, is not every seed company has gotten on the microgreen train, truly, clearly understands the market potential, and they've harnessed that and they've done a really good job of that. And there's a couple other seed companies out there, but that have done the same. But if you look at how many seed companies sell pepper seeds and tomatoes in the US at the national level, there's probably 15, 20. At the regional packet level, there's, I don't know, 50, 100 in the US, maybe, I don't know. But when you look at companies that actually market for microgreens, there's only a handful. So not everybody realizes that potential, that demand.
Or they may not be able to supply it.
Or they may not be able to supply it. Or they may not sell bulk seeds. As a sales seed rep, I've been in the industry 11 years, but I didn't have a background coming in. The first thing I noticed as, hey, Randy, it's your first day as a sales rep. Let's look at your territory. and you look at how many of your top 10, 25, 50 customers are microgreen growers, like they're seeding large quantities every single week all year long, right? So I think that's what drove my personal interest. And today I can learn about onions and corn and talk to these 25 growers, 50 growers, or I can learn about microgreens and be able to service that whole market and make up, have one conversation with one grower that spends more money than these 10 other farmers combined on, on seed. So that drove my interest in learning more about microgreens, learning more about hydroponics. Same way, hydroponic lettuce, hydroponic baby leaf, leafy greens, seeding every week, high density. That's where my passion to learn came from, because I knew they consume more seed. And I also knew that if I learned how to grow microgreens, I could talk to a customer in Texas the same way I could talk to one in California and one in New York, because their field conditions aren't different. It's all indoors, it's all protected culture. We learn a couple concepts, and I can make recommendations and consult with them and be off to the races.
Hard change of gears.
Yeah.
Another question.
Sure.
We watch the forums and stuff just to see what the conversation is, and I've seen several times, I mean, people just get furious about how much seeds cost. Can we defend a seed breeder?
Sure. So I don't think people realize, let's say there's a market need for a late blight resistant tomato. We've seen more issues of late blight in the last 20 years. If I said, okay, today I've identified a need for a red, round tomato with late blight resistance, it may take me 8 years to produce that, to commercialize that variety. First, I need to find a plant that already has some sort of resistance naturally in nature to it. I need to find a flavorful red round variety, and I need to cross those. But I also need yield, and I need to cross it with that, and I may have a candidate pool of 300 crosses that I need to grow out and then select the best from that.
Which all takes space and
it
time
takes
and
takes
infrastructure
time.
And heating and cooling and water.
And hand pollinating and exclusion tents. So that way this tomato doesn't accidentally cross with one over here that you're intentionally trying to keep separate.
An exclusion tent, if you don't know, it basically keeps pollen from drifting from one to another.
Pollen or pollinators, right? So you may very much want to prevent bees from doing what they do best, right? You don't want a bee to go from this tomato plant over to this one.
This is not spraying. This is a physical barrier.
This is a physical barrier. It's an insect protect, type net. In concept, no different than what we're selling for our roll-up sides on the bootstrap high tunnel kits. So we're talking land. We're talking someone maintaining and saving seed by hand on 300 varieties. In some cases, we might have to buy genetics that are already have late blight resistance. We may need to spend 8 years and 8 seasons doing back crosses. So I'll give you
with somebody you didn't hire off the corner of the street,
someone with a doctorate, right? And then we've got years invested before we sell our first seed, right? So you'll see companies that try to fast track this. So an example might be doing counter seasonal productions, right? Or nurseries. So I've got 300 plants. I like these 50 out of that batch of 300. I'm going to throw 250 of those away. I'm going to concentrate on these 50. But I know I'm going to need to grow them out again and cross-pollinate them with a tomato that's a little bigger or has a different leaf shape or has more yield, because I'm trying to stack those genetic pieces in, right? Like
And this doesn't happen over a week. It's like over the course of a season.
Over the course of a full growing season, right? So what we may do is we may have that nursery in Maine and have a season production, right? And when it's winter in Maine, and we have to wait 6 months to plant more seed and do more back crosses, we might physically take those plants or those seeds and ship them down to South America. And during our winter in Maine, we now have another season growing in South America, and we've basically taken that 8 years of breeding work and we've condensed it down into 4 because we've had 2 seasons in the same year, right? So there's little tricks like that you can do, but there's significant investment in it. And
again, this is not genetic modification.
Correct. It's not done in a lab. This is traditional breeding methods where it's no different than someone with blonde hair and blue eyes procreating with someone with brown hair and green eyes, because you're trying to get a blonde haired person with green eyes, right? Like you're taking...
Well, that's dystopian, isn't
it? Reflecting back on it, probably not the best example, but you get the point anyway, right? That that came out, that offspring came out with dirty blonde hair. We want a brighter blonde, so we're gonna do a back cross and retry procreating with that blonde with this offspring and chasing those genetics to get that perfectly round tomato that's this size, the yield, the late blight resistance, good shelf life or taste.
And then and only then do you have to grow an entire field to seed out to then become the first packages. It's a whole nother season.
Sure. And then you'll have someone say, well, that wasn't grown in Texas. It's not going to work for me. So it's a process. It's a very laborsome process with all the costs front loaded, and then we still have to produce the seed every year, and we have to maintain that. So rather than taking that now offspring and just saving seed from that, we can't just do that. We have to save seed from each parent, because the offspring is what we want, and we know the recipe for that is this mom and this dad is going to make that offspring. So we actually need to save seed from those plants and produce that out to be able to do those crosses and mass produce that offspring. It's intense, but and now if you're a grower listening to this, you're like, well, this sounds like big seed industry. This sounds like we want genetic diversity. We want to be able to save our own seed, and we want heirlooms, and we want to cut the money and the industry out of it. And that, to each their own.
And this is a natural thing, and nobody should be able to profit off of it.
Sure. But what we're actually, the seed companies are trying to do, or they're trying to help growers be successful. So you can absolutely succeed with that heirloom, that you've used for 20 years. You can, if you're spraying for disease pressure.
Which costs money.
If you're going through and pruning the plants so that they get that optimal yield and the labor, and you've spaced them perfectly, and you've got the perfect cultural conditions, or you've babied that plant, you've put it in a high tunnel, you've excluded all of these external factors and paid twice the labor for half the yield, you can do that. But if we can bake that disease resistant in that plant, so we don't have to spray chemicals, so we don't need as much labor in the field to help that grower be more successful.
So you produce more.
So you produce more.
You produce better.
So you're exactly. So I'm not trying to shift someone's opinion or say the way they're doing it is right or wrong, but you'll also usually find the heartfelt, I want heirloom open pollinated, and we're not even talking organic, because these hybridized varieties, this process of 8 years in creating this variety could still be organic seed, non-GMO, organic, great from employee-owned companies, from very sustainable companies.
I mean, you want to talk about passion and growing. These people that do this type of work, they're on a whole nother level.
Sure.
They don't care about anything else other than that project. I mean, they're dedicated folks.
And
they're dedicated for you.
That's it, right? They're dedicated for you. They want you to be able to succeed with that variety. You can absolutely use this other one if that works for you, but we tend to find the market that feels so passionate about that heirloom open pollinated variety tend to be more home gardeners, homesteaders, preppers, but when it's a matter of being able to scale their business up, or there's not enough labor to run the farm, or they need to fulfill a contract to X number of bushels of tomatoes or whatever it is,
right?
They're gonna need that workhorse variety.
Well, I wanted to give some flowers to the breeders out there. I think their work is highly misunderstood. I think it's extremely undervalued. And for somebody to have a misconception about the process and the reasonings why and the how it actually happens, and then to get upset that they have to spend $1 on one seed that's going to save them 30, and then they can charge so much more for a better crop,
sure,
with a higher yield. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
And when you look at, I know it's a hard thing to conceptualize, but seed input is like 0.5% or 1% of your overall farming business input. You know, when you talk about labor, lands, fuel to get to market and back, packaging, it's one of the smallest inputs in the overhead cost. So if that variety is a labor saver, because it'll produce twice as much fruit with half the number of plants, something to really think about.
Well, I think this is a good chance to talk about the actual next thing on my list.
Sure, yeah.
that was a deep down road to get caught up on, but the notion of ordering not just seeds, but ordering any supply
sure
early, taking the responsibility that, hey, I need to supply my business. I need to make sure that I'm hedging against traffic delays, shipping issues, supply chain issues. I think now more than ever, look, it's one of those things. Everybody has a calendar. You can go get a calendar 6 different ways within 2 minutes of wherever you're sitting. That calendar will tell you next year, July is going to fall in between June and August.
Sure.
You know that going into it. Don't be shocked that it's hot. You know?
Well, that's the thing, right? So you kind of give a pass for some of the first year growers that haven't been through a season before. You know, they haven't maybe experienced that. But to really set yourself up, we're in an environment where there are supply gaps. And I don't know if that's truly, I don't think it's a supply issue and a demand issue, Nick. I think it's a supply chain and lead time issue.
This affected both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep saying we, and I keep,
sure.
Now it's you and it's you and I. But what we went through during COVID is we're a company set up for the occasional small grower, but mainly dedicated to medium to larger size market garden type farms. And then all of a sudden, our 3 people that we have doing customer service phone calls, instead of getting 10 calls a day apiece, are now getting 100 calls a day apiece. And it takes just as long to ship 60 trays to one of our regular growers as it does 2.
Right.
And so a lot of these delays that we found, again, to your point, us being mainly USA produced at this point, it wasn't supply chain. It was like we 10-folded our orders per day, every single day for months on end. There was just no light at the end of the tunnel.
Sure. And in that example, right, where you say 60 trays versus 2 trays takes the same amount of time, all of this new demand at least in my experience, was a lot of first-time growers entering, leaving their 9 to 5 job and starting their own business, scaling up just a little bit, or diversifying for the first time, and they didn't need that particular tray last year, but they need it this year for whatever reason. So the issue isn't that you don't have enough trays to go around. Just like the seed companies, the issue isn't that there's not enough seed to go around. The issue is the labor need to write that order for 2 more trays times 100. That's the bottleneck.
And then compound that with it was hard as hell to get any labor.
Sure, exactly.
And still to this day.
And do it in a safe and responsible way, right? So you're not going to...
You can't throw 20 extra people inside of a cramped warehouse.
Exactly.
During a pandemic.
Exactly. Someone has the sniffles, you're going to send them home and protect the rest of your, protect them, but also protect the rest of your workforce and the health of your employees, right?
And then that means that workforce is doing not only their job, but the job of that person that went home wasn't able to get done. Correct. So the hours are getting longer, the workload is increasing. Takes a minute.
Yep. Yes, there's some supply chain stuff built in, lead times from manufacturers, but because they were experiencing the same exact thing. But I think you guys have done the smart thing, transitioning over the last couple of years, if I understand this, to more U.S. based manufacturing, local manufacturing. Takes a lot of that risk.
That's right from a production standpoint, but keep in mind it's been the last 4 to actually get that going.
Yeah, it's not something that happens overnight, right?
Well, because we spent a lot of time vetting who we were going to get into business with, and making sure that they could do what they said they could do, that we liked them and that we could get along with them, and that we had similar cultures and similar values. It's these are people that we work. I call these people every single day.
Sure.
And we work through different issues together. We troubleshoot. They make us much better manufacturers. And we wanted to make sure that somebody had the time to take with us as a new vendor. So, I mean, the stuff we know now versus the stuff we knew a year ago, hell, it's vastly different. And we've shared that on these platforms so people, can come on the ride with us.
Sure. And so to circle back in the takeaway, I think here is you and I both know there's going to be frost coming in the fall. Let's not wait 3 days before frost comes and you see it in the forecast to order your floating row cover. Let's put the high tunnel up now. Let's order trays for next season. Let's think about those needs now. Save yourself some expedited shipping. Save yourself the headaches of UPS, FedEx lead times. On average, maybe 3 or 4 days. If it turns into 6, we don't want that.
Or if your package gets lost.
Or if your package gets lost, right? Outside of our hands, but those types of things shouldn't be a thorn in our customer's side if they had planned early. And I know that's tough. I know that's asking a lot. To be nimble, to be diversified, you're going to get a new request. A new customer's going to come along. A new business opportunity opens up for our customers, and they can't always plan. But there are things that we know to be true. You're going to need seeds. You're going to need trays. Frost will be coming. You're going to need more grow media. Think about those things. And I know you're running around, and there's always work to be done. But you're going to need those products. So buy in bulk. Save yourself some money. Save yourself some ship costs by not having to expedite.
Well, and a lot of this can be hedged with the next thing on the list, which is I'm going to reframe this whole conversation. Sure. This is, we're talking about issues that you have seen with new growers, medium growers, older growers, large, small, whatever the case may be, historically over your career. These are items that cause problems for people.
Sure.
whether it's just simply missed or it's not thought about, whatever the case may be. But the next one is record keeping. If you have great records and you're referring back to them and reviewing them as part of that process, you know that these seasons are coming up. Let's forecast our needs, just like we are as a company. How many trays are we going to do in this run? You know, we're forecasting what the needs are based off of the time of year. It's on you as the business owner to forecast your needs. Those records are going to help.
And it's not I think a lot of people think of record keeping as like a punishment or a you know, you need it for taxes, you need it for this, and it's busy work, but it's a tool, right? It's a tool to see what did I plant last season and how am I going to use that to make an educated guess on what I should plant this season, what my needs are. I know I doubled that field size, so I'm going to need twice as much broccoli as I needed last year. You know, I know that I'm going to need to hire an extra body to do this, or
you're going to need more packaging.
Or you're going to need more packaging, or I want to be organic certified, and they're going to want to know, am I buying organic seed? What they're going to reconcile your books to see what did you produce versus what were your inputs, and do those numbers jive, right? So when you can start extrapolating data from what did I plant, what were my sales on that per crop, how many people did it take to harvest it, what were my input costs, all that, you can start making very smart business decisions. Like, you might be the best okra grower on the planet and sell bushel after bushel after bushel at market, but when you start penciling out the numbers and that doesn't pay the bills, you may be better off not growing that. Right? And you won't know that without the records to back it up.
And I'm going to put my media hat on, right? As a small farmer, it's your job to also be your own media department. When are you going to start needing to advertise, and what type of ads worked better last year than others to sell your CSA, to upsell those CSA options? When do you have to start reminding your folks that, hey, we're fixing to start producing. Hey, it's first day at the market. There's this event at the market. When do your people need to be reminded well in advance so they can pin?
Sure.
The time to invite somebody to the first opening day of the farmer's market is not the Friday before the Saturday that happens. They've already got stuff to do.
Sure.
Hey, 6 weeks from now, this is going to happen. Hey, 4 weeks from now, this is going to happen. Remember, come see us so you can allocate time for your day. It's a service to your clients to make sure that you're helping them remember these things.
Sure.
And the quicker you can sell the CSA through those ads or through that awareness or whatever campaign you're coming up with, the quicker you can get those funds allocated, the quicker you know to help you in your forecasting.
Sure. So
just part of it.
Which
I'm sorry. But to go back, that also means, hey, I need to schedule at the peak of season when everything is the best to make sure I take the photographs to use in those next year's ads.
Yep.
And where are you going to store those photographs? And are you going to do any edits? Are you going to hire somebody to do that for you? It's a year-long process.
Sure.
So I'll get off that soapbox now.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, right? And now to think about that, like, we've probably experienced a lot of growers that sell extra plants at market, right? So going back to that theory of reaching out to your customer base weeks in advance, what's going to be what's going to be more successful for you, right? Show up on market, say come to market, you have plants there, or to say I'm going to be at market 4 weeks from now with plants. Start getting your garden ready. Till, don't till, silage tarps, whatever it's going to be. Start prepping. And if you get your customer excited for that, best believe they're going to show up ready to buy some plants from you, right? So there's it's those little details that make such a huge impact.
You just gave the example a minute ago about, hey, we're doubling the size of our production. We're going to need double C's. We're going to need double the packaging, whatever the case may be. The last thing that we had on our list, our very rough outline,
Sure.
was scale appropriateness and what farmers can do either in the initial or in secondary and third build outs of the farm to make sure you're maximizing that dollar and possibly a lot of labor at the same time.
It's I've had so many conversations throughout the year where, the first thing a grower wants to do is go buy a tractor, right? And have a tractor payment on a 1 acre garden. And we all want cool stuff. We want the toys. We want the stuff that's gonna bring efficiencies, but that might not be the best scale appropriate tool for what you're trying to achieve. Another example is you and I have talked about in the last week visiting the warehouse facility, and we say, yeah, we're ready to build another warehouse addition. And after reflecting on it a little bit, we realized we're going to need to double the size of that, right? Because we've got that forethought to say we've expanded, 5 times in the last 3 years.
It's never been enough space.
And it's never been enough. So let's double it, right? Give us a little bit of room to grow. And in a lot of cases, you can help your costs on that, right? Like when you look through a catalog or a website, there are price breaks built into a lot of that. So you're going to need more trays. Buy the 30 pack instead of the 15 pack. There's
and I've heard this more than once, my business is dependent on 25 trays. I have to have 25 trays or else this is not going to work. And they order exactly 25 trays.
Sure.
There's no room for lost, damaged, expansion.
Sure.
Trials.
Took it to the delivered micros to the restaurant and they kept my tray.
Or they threw it out.
And any of that. Julian, part of my training this week with Julian, we looked at NRCS grants, and they pay up to a certain dollar amount per square foot. Well, the larger the structure, the cheaper per square foot. So, they may be able to cover a significant portion of a 20-foot long high tunnel. But for a very small incremental amount more, you can double the size of that high tunnel. Right?
And you're
going to build another one next year anyway.
Let's talk about the why of that.
Sure.
If you're going to order, let's just say a 20 by 50.
Mm-hmm.
That's 50 foot high tunnel, 2 end walls, a door, possibly 2 doors, the labor to initially grade the land, do the water, whatever the case may be.
Sure.
The next year, you build another 20 by 50. That's 2 more end walls, which cover, I think we figured up, it's like close to 30% of the cost of a hoop house is the 2 end walls.
Sure.
Door options can add up to another 10%. And so...
And the pallet and trucking company to get that second high tunnel to your door. So
we're starting from square one all over again. Versus, you know what? One of the I'm just going to hypothetical number. Let's just say it was $6,000 to do a 20 by 50.
Sure, hypothetical.
And then next year it's another 6,000. Or for 7,500, you could have built a 20 by 100.
Yep.
And been done with it. Big difference.
Yep. Give you room to grow, and you don't have to plant the whole thing. You may want to,
and you probably will,
and you probably will, and
but in that probably will, you might find that you still didn't account for what your market could bear.
Sure.
Or you've bought yourself some trial space.
Exactly. Or storage space or whatever, but you don't have to go through that cost maybe rent another lift, hire another crew to help you set it up. It's, you're talking a few more ribs and a significant savings to you, right? So,
I mean, just the notion of the plastic. I mean, when we cut plastic off a master roll, it takes just as long to cut 100 foot than it does 20 foot. And you're paying for part of that cost. And that's why you talked about incremental price breaks for volume. It's no different than a piece of plastic. Yeah. No different than the hoop house. So, I mean, look, we weaved in and out and brought things back during this conversation, but it's just food for thought. Some of this may have been accounted for. Some of this may not have been accounted for. And there's probably 100 other things we could and should discuss, but this is, I'm sure, already pretty long.
Sure. And some of it ties back to stuff we've talked about, right? Like, goes back to having a contact at the company you're working with. And I don't care if it's seeds, if it's trays, if it's high tunnels, if it's
your local repair shop,
right? Like, ask the questions. These are experts that deal with this every single day, and if we can find a way to save you $1, we're gonna try, right? So let's have those conversations about what you're trying to do and see if we can help you achieve it.
Wow, man, it's good to have the perspective that you have in these conversations. Looking forward to the next one. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, we really focused on this one is what farmers can and should do on their farm. But the next thing, the next podcast, we're going to look at just industry trends that you were looking at your other company, that we've been looking at for a while, what we're hearing from other farmers. So this is not so much, hey, what are you doing on your farm, but hey, what can we expect to happen in the agricultural industry? We'll see you next week.